I remember well the chill of the Swedish dawn, the damp air filled with the scent of pine and salt from a nearby fjord. And I, Olaf, the village shaman, stood at the edge of our settlement, pondering the mysteries of fate and the curious hum of life in these unpredictable days of raiding and conquest. My tale, as I now recount it in the gentle twilight of memory, begins with both hardship and a wry humor that would later become my constant companion through the long, stormy nights and breezy evenings alike. I was born to a humble fisherman's family in a small coastal village near modern-day Gothenburg, though the lands then were untamed and wild, filled with rugged beauty and a mysticism that seemed to dance in the northern lights. Even in my earliest recollections, I felt that the gods played tricks on me, a destiny both harsh and hilariously ironic. One could say I was marked for a peculiar fate, for while other children chased each other through the meadows, I found myself lost in the whispers of the wind, listening for secrets only the ancient gods dared impart. My childhood was not like that of most warriors, or even gentle souls. I was forever estranged from the raucous revelries that defined Viking society. Instead, I was drawn to the hidden mysteries among the tall pines and rocky outcrops, seeking comfort in the silent counsel of the earth and sky. I recall many an afternoon spent by the water's edge, where I would trace ripples in the lake with a stick, pondering the hidden meaning of each ripple as a sign from the gods. It was on one such afternoon that I first heard the curious murmur of a spirit, a soft, almost whispered laugh carried on the wind. I later learned from my grandmother, a wise woman of our people, with a penchant for stirring the strongest teas from roots and berries. That laughter was often the playful sign of Loki himself, a harbinger of change and mischief, even in the darkest times. I must admit, even as a child with an earnest heart, I found it both terrifying and inexplicably funny that the gods would choose humor as their language. As I grew and began my formal tutelage under the village seer, I discovered that my destiny was intertwined with the precarious balance between the natural world and the capricious desires of fate. Under his strict but loving guidance, I learned the art of divination through the reading of patterns in animal bones and the forging of charms from river stones and driftwood. My master, a stoic man with a thick beard and a deep love for a well-aged mead, often said that the gods were as unpredictable as the tides. And sometimes even they had a sense of humor that led to peculiar outcomes. I recall many long nights when we sat by the crackling fire, and my master would regale me with tales of shamans who foretold storms with the flicker of a flame, or the errant jump of a salmon. His tales were always laced with a subtle irony, an acknowledgement that destiny was a capricious artist, painting scenes both tragic and absurd. It came as no surprise when, as the seasons turned and I entered adulthood, the call to serve as the shaman during times of raids and warfare became undeniable. The very same gods who whispered in the rustling leaves now demanded that I aid our brave and sometimes bumbling warriors who set out to claim new lands and treasures. Our raiding parties were a curious blend of daring bravery and unintentional comedy, prone to both heartbreak and hilarity in equal measure. I remember one fateful expedition where our band of hardened warriors set sail into the gray mist beyond familiar waters. We were led by a chieftain, renowned for both his valor and his impromptu sense of humor, himself a man who had once confused an otter for an enemy spy, much to the amusement of the entire crew. I had been tasked with reading the signs before our departure, and I recall standing on the prow of our longship as the wind howled and the deep water beckoned. In my meditations, I saw visions of swirling mists filled with monstrous shapes. Yet in between these ominous apparitions, I even recognized a faint image of a barrel rolling downhill, a spectral jest perhaps from a capricious deity. I felt both honored and slightly bemused, for I was not entirely sure if the gods were warning us of impending doom or simply setting us up for a cosmic practical joke. The journey was arduous and filled with moments where laughter broke through the tension like sunlight through cloudy skies. I recall one particularly disorienting night when the sea seemed to conspire against us, tossing our ship as if it were a small toy caught in a divine game of marbles. Waves crashed over the sides, and the warriors gripped their axes and shields with a mix of fear and incredulity, as if wondering whether they should at once battle the element or hide behind the rigging. In the midst of this watery chaos, I closed my eyes and reached out with my spirit, seeking guidance from those who dwelled in the hidden realms. In that trance, I saw a great sea serpent wrapped around our vessel, not with the menacing intent of a predator, but performing what resembled a clumsy pirouette on the deck. When I emerged from the trance, I told the assembled crew of the serpent's absurd gyration, and to our collective relief and amusement, we interpreted it as an omen of good luck. A divine reminder that even in the face of nature's fury, there was room for laughter. Later, during the long hours that followed, our horns were raised in toasts to the creative humor of the gods, who clearly enjoyed blending terror and mirth in equal measure. As the journey proceeded, our path led us inland to a rugged and frost-kissed land, replete with dense forests and craggy mountains that had long been whispered about in the sagas of old. It was there that I encountered the wild spirit of our ancestors in earnest, a presence that seemed to seep from the very stones and trees, whispering secrets of legacy and the cyclical nature of life. I wandered through these ancient groves with a respectful trepidation, my staff and my worn leather pouch filled with sacred herbs clutched in my calloused hand. Every so often, my senses would be met with the playful rustling of leaves, and I could almost imagine that the very earth was laughing at my slow, methodical pace. A reminder that the divine was never too distant, even in the guise of dry humor. In one memorable instance, while gathering juniper berries on a crisp autumn morning, I encountered a particularly spirited fox. Mischievously bright and glimmering with the cunning of the wild, mirrored the same trickster energy attributed to Loki. The fox trotted around me before disappearing into a thicket, leaving me both perplexed and smiling at the absurdity of the encounter. I took it as a sign that no matter how heavy the burden of fate might be, the world retained its capacity for unexpected levity. My role as shaman was not one of unbroken solemnity, however. There were countless instances where my duties led me into quarrels with both the spiritual and mortal realms, and each time I found myself grappling with the challenge of maintaining balance between reverence and humor. I remember a particular raid in which, after a fierce clash with a rival clan, we claimed a small village along the river. The inhabitants, though naturally scared, were surprisingly willing to share their modest stores of food with our weary band of warriors. Amid the serious business of dividing spoils and recounting battle strategies, I could not help but notice that one of their prized goats, apparently inspired by my own eccentric spirit, began following me around as if it were my personal familiar. The absurdity of a goat shadowing a battle-hardened shaman caused even the most stoic of our warriors to chuckle, a rare occurrence indeed in times of conflict. I had to remind myself that the divine often worked in mysterious and unexpectedly humorous ways, reminding all involved that life could be both sacred and ridiculous in equal measure. In the countless nights that followed, while our men feasted and recounted the battles of the day, I would sit apart from the revelry, my mind adrift in contemplations of the ancient lore and the intricate weave of fate and fortune. Sometimes I would muse that perhaps I was less a shaman and more an unwitting jester in the cosmic theater, destined to serve both as a mediator for the gods and as evidence that even the gravest moments could be lightened by a well-timed joke. It is not often that one finds solace in the interplay of reverence and chuckle-worthy absurdity. Yet I became increasingly aware that the humor of the gods served as a subtle reminder that life, in all its often ruthless intensity, was also meant to be lived with a twinkle in the eye, a lesson that carried me through many a long winter. As the years passed and the banner of my service remained raised above the tumult end of our various endeavors, there came a time when we returned, not as triumphant conquerors laden with plunder, but as weary travelers whose souls bore the heavy marks of sorrow and joy intertwined. I vividly recall our arrival back in the village, the sun setting in splendid hues of orange and purple, as though the heavens themselves were applauding our return. There was a curious reunion with both friend and foe alike. Those who had once mocked our escapades now embraced the merriment of our shared existence. I spent many a calm evening walking along the river, my thoughts meandering as freely as the water itself. I would often recall the strange sequence of events that had transformed me from a timid boy enchanted by the mysteries of the natural world into a man of considerable repute. An elder shaman, who had seen empires rise and fall, felt the icy grip of death at the edge of every raiding expedition, and yet retained within him a capacity for humor that few could rival. For instance, I once found myself in the midst of a rather serious ritual meant to invoke the blessings of the gods for an impending winter. As I intoned the sacred verses with all the solemnity one could muster, a rogue gust of wind swept through the gathering, scattering our offerings and sending a nearby goat bleating in a manner that, to my own surprise, resembled a chorus of mocking laughter. The assembled crowd, after a moment of stunned silence, dissolved into reluctant giggles, and I, recognizing the serendipity of that moment, allowed myself a rare smile. Such was the fate of a shaman. Even when reciting the most solemn prayers, the absurd could not be entirely expunged from the fabric of existence. Time, as it is wont to do, marched forward, and I grew older with the wisdom of many seasons etched into my bones. Even as my hair silvered like the foam on a broken wave, I found that the passing years only deepened my appreciation for the small, often overlooked moments that made life so richly textured. The faces of villagers who had once feared the rites of spirit and magic now appeared to me as dear old friends, each with their own stories woven into the greater tapestry of our shared past. I remember one autumn when a harsh frost threatened to steal away the lives of our crops and the warmth of our hearths. Amid the despair that hung heavy in the winter winds, I gathered the villagers by the great oak in the center of the village and told them the tale of a frost giant with an affable, if slightly bumbling, disposition. I recounted how this giant, forced to seek refuge in the nearest tavern after a particularly embarrassing encounter with a trickster sprite, had unwittingly brought warmth in the form of laughter to all he met. The absurdity of a frost giant ordering a mug of mead and complaining about the scarcity of hearty stew had the villagers laughing heartily, their worries momentarily forgotten as the warmth of humor kindled their spirits. This simple tale, spun from the threads of myth and a generous sprinkling of humor, reminded us all that even in the coldest of times, the human heart could be set aglow by a shared smile. Yet not all memories were so light, for life as a shaman in those turbulent times inevitably intersected with sorrow and loss. I remember with a heavy heart the day when a terrible feud erupted between two neighboring clans, a conflict born of pride and ancestral grievances that had simmered for generations. I was called upon to serve as a mediator, to invoke the favor of the gods and broker peace between bitter enemies. I left no stone unturned in my quest for wisdom, and I journeyed deep into the forest to seek the counsel of an ancient spirit said to dwell in the ruins of a long-forgotten temple. There, amidst crumbling stone and overgrown ivy, I knelt in silent prayer, offering a token of peace, a small carved talisman, that my mother had once given me as a child. In the silence, I heard not only the murmurs of the earth, but also a faint, almost cheeky remark from unseen forces that it was foolish to assume that even the gods could mend the rifts of human nature. Emerging from that solitude with both insight and a wry smile, I returned to the feuding clans and, after many days of negotiations, interspersed with moments of unexpected levity, such as when an overly dramatic recitation of the village's founding saga nearly sent one rival clan member into peals of uncontrollable laughter, we managed to forge an uneasy truce. In retrospect, I often think that our success was due not solely to the solemn rituals I performed, but also to the cosmic irony of finding humor in the midst of chaos. It served as a gentle reminder that even the most entrenched conflicts were not immune to the redeeming power of a well-placed jest. Throughout these endless years, as I wandered the rugged landscapes and bore witness to the ebb and flow of our tumultuous age, I amassed a wealth of experiences that oscillated between the profound and the absurd. I recall many a night under the stars when I, seated by a humble fire, would muse on the nature of destiny with an almost philosophical resignation, acknowledging that the same hands that carved our fates also prodded us with pins of playful irony. In one such moment, I found myself in the company of an old wanderer, an enigmatic figure shrouded in mystery, who claimed to have once sailed with the great sea god Njord himself. Over a modest feast of reindeer stew and flatbread, this wanderer regaled me with stories of a distant land where the sun never fully set and where laughter was believed to be the language of the divine. His words, wrapped in allegory and delivered with a twinkle in his eye, reinforced my belief that even amidst the bitter tang of war and loss, one must always heed the call to find a moment of levity. I often ponder the great irony that a man who spent his life among savage raiders and brutal skirmishes could still find the time to appreciate the delicate absurdity of a poorly timed hiccup during a ritual. A hiccup which, in my own experience, had once so thoroughly disrupted an augury that the entire gathering had erupted into an impromptu round of merriment. In the later chapters of my life, as the tides of conflict slowed and the once vibrant roar of battle gave way to a quieter, steadier rhythm, I increasingly felt the weight of legacy upon me, a duty to preserve the stories of our people with honesty, humor, and a deep appreciation for all the little ironies that colored our existence. I took it upon myself to record the sagas of our deeds in carefully inked runes upon weathered parchment, ensuring that future generations might know both the valor and the absurdity that lived within our hearts. I wrote of heroic raids that ended in unexpected danse macabre with nature's own sense of mischief, of battles so fierce they echoed with the thunder of the gods, only to be punctuated by the sudden interruption of a wayward squirrel or a misplaced step that sent a warrior tumbling into a muddy puddle. Every line I inscribed was a tribute to the fragile balance between fate and free will, a reminder that even as we strove for greatness on the field of battle, it was the laughter that carried us forward in the face of inevitable loss. I have since spent many a winter in the quiet comfort of my modest dwelling, its walls adorned with memories of a time when the world was a place of both wonder and unfathomable cruelty, and yet always tinged with humor, as if even the gods themselves could not resist a jovial wink. I remember the countless discussions I once held with my peers, wise men and women who shared my belief that life was too fleeting to be taken entirely seriously, and how we would sit together, nursing cups of warm herbal mead, and laugh at the recollection of our younger days. We joked about the many times our serious incantations were punctuated by a stray sneeze or a passing gust of wind that turned an ominous chant into something more akin to a farcical opera. Such moments, I believe, were the true embodiment of the divine's paradox, that within the struggle of existence lay the seeds of both despair and uncontrollable mirth. One particular memory I hold dear is that of a midsummer festival, celebrating the bounties of nature and the warmth of the sun, a rare reprieve from the perpetual chill of our northern winters. The entire village gathered in the clearing, adorned with wildflowers and ribbons, each person dressed in their finest furs and linens. As dusk approached and the bonfire roared to life, I took my place among the elders to perform a ritual intended to summon the blessings of Freyr, the god of fertility and prosperity. With every measured step and carefully uttered verse, my mind wandered to the many whimsical occurrences that had punctuated my years as a shaman. In that moment, as I chanted in the low, resonant tones that had been passed down through countless generations, I could not help but notice the incongruity of it all, the solemnity of the ritual, beautifully countered by the sight of a mischievous child tugging at a stray braid of an elderly woman, resulting in a chuckle that rippled through the crowd. The absurdity of it all warmed my heart as much as the bonfire's flames lit up the night, affirming that joy, like sorrow, was an unavoidable thread woven into the tapestry of our lives. In the quiet hours that now punctuate my daily routine, I often find myself seated near a modest hearth, a simple wooden cup of herbal tea in hand, and I reflect on how the road of life, with its unpredictable twists and unexpected detours, led me here in a state of calm acceptance. I have spent decades traversing landscapes both physical and spiritual, witnessing wonders that defied mortal understanding and experiencing moments of humor that brightened even the bleakest nights. It is in these moments of recollection that I come to see that the harshness of our era, the battles, the raids, the bitter feuds, was intricately interlaced with pockets of hilarity and human warmth. I have learned to embrace the irony that our most dire struggles often give rise to the sweetest of laughter, and that the gods, with their inscrutable plans, seem to delight in balancing peril with playful pranks. This acceptance has rendered my twilight years a gentle solace, a period where I pass on my stories to anyone willing to listen, weaving the laughter of 1,000 tiny moments into the broader narrative of our shared past. I now live in a small cottage at the edge of a vast and quiet forest, far from the roaring clamor of battles and the constant threat of rival clans. Here, in the soft, green embrace of nature, I am free to wander barefoot along dew-kissed meadows as I recount my adventures to the occasional visitor or write down my memories on scraps of parchment that are sure to crumble with time. The forest whispers secrets in my ear, the rustling of leaves, a gentle reminder of the laughter of ancient spirits who watched over us from the very beginning. It is a serene existence, and yet sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind carries echoes of ages past, I can almost hear the distant clamor of long-forgotten skirmishes and the hearty laughter of warriors whose joy was tempered by the harsh realities of fate. Even as I sit here, supported by the gnarled roots of a venerable oak, I know that my tale, like all tales, is one of contrasts, a tapestry woven with threads of sorrow and humor, tragedy and mirth, harshness and gentle absurdity. I recall a particularly poignant yet amusing episode from what seems now like a lifetime ago. I had been summoned to a nearby settlement troubled by a recent spate of ill fortune, where crops had failed and an inexplicable melancholy hung over the people like a shroud. The local chieftain, a burly man with a booming voice and a penchant for dramatic declarations, had pleaded for my intervention. I traveled there with the solemn duty of lifting their spirits and appeasing the capricious forces of nature. On arriving at the settlement, I was greeted by a procession so outlandish in its mixture of desperation and determined optimism that it seemed plucked directly from one of the more whimsical sagas of our forebears. The villagers had arranged themselves in a sort of makeshift parade, carrying relics and totems of every sort, from tarnished copper cauldrons to intricately woven baskets that purportedly held the blessings of Frigg. As I began my incantations, the wind picked up in an almost theatrical manner, scattering a few of the offerings and sending the chieftain's prized, albeit rather suspicious, lucky sock flying high like a banner. The absurdity of the moment was not lost on any present. Even the usually stern chieftain couldn't help but let out a hearty laugh, a sound that in that moment of shared vulnerability seemed to dissolve the very mantle of misfortune that had burdened the settlement. It was a vivid reminder that sometimes the best remedy for despair was a generous helping of laughter, even if that laughter was at the expense of one's cherished heirloom. In the many seasons since, I have often marveled at how the world retains its capacity for humor in the face of life's relentless trials. When I sit in the quiet of the evenings, tracing the lines and grooves of time etched upon the walls of my memory, I remember vividly the countless sometimes absurd rituals, the unexpected folly of nature, and the simple fact that every experience, no matter how harrowing, has yielded its own snippet of laughter. I find solace in knowing that even as distant thunder warned of battles yet to come, the gentle call of mirth was always there, waiting to remind us that hope can be found even in the darkest hours. This gently rolling tide of irony, blending both the solemn and the ridiculous into a single memorable current, has carried me through a life that many might call brutal and unforgiving, yet in my own quiet judgment has been blessed with moments of exquisite, almost sacramental joy. I have been known to muse that in the great ledger of fate, my life's account is balanced not only with the debits of war and hardship, but also with a rather unexpected credit. The laughter that echoed even when the skies burned red with battle. Each day, I am grateful for the tangled weave of destiny that has allowed me to witness history in all its ferocity and absurdity. I have walked the rugged paths of ancient Sweden, through forests dark and mysterious, along windswept cliffs facing the endless sea, and I have seen things that would chill the spine of even the stoutest warrior. Yet, in every shadow cast by the twilight of despair, I have also found something delightfully trivial to smile about. Even now, in the quiet hum of a late autumn night, when the moon hung low and the cool breeze teased the edges of my memories, I can recall with gentle amusement the time when in the midst of a particularly intense ritual to summon the blessings of the harvest, an errant crow, unimpressed by my solemnity, launched itself onto my shoulder. Its presence, simultaneously imposing and comical, had the effect of breaking the tension in such a splendid manner that the assembled crowd erupted in laughter, a moment which I have since celebrated as the crow's ironic blessing upon our community. Such episodes, transient and ephemeral as they might be, have become the cornerstones of my personal myth and a testament to the enduring spirit of our people. My life, chronicled gently across decades, is now a library of memories, each chapter lined with both sword and smile, peril and playful wink. I have seen many a raiding party set out with resolve, their hearts hardened by the promise of glory and vengeance, yet softened, if only for a moment, by the slapstick unpredictability of fate. I have trudged alongside warriors whose fierce loyalty was rivaled only by their inexplicable ability to laugh in the face of mortal danger. Men who, when confronted with the absurdity of a crooked arrow or the mischievous antics of a woodland spirit, chose to embrace the unpredictability of life with a shrug and a smile. And in this strange, woven fate of ours, I have learned that it is not the absence of hardship that defines a life well lived, but rather the ability to find light in the darkest moments, a light that is kindled by laughter, even as it is illuminated by the cold gleam of steel. Now, as I write these reflections in the quiet comfort of my later years, I am touched by the gentle notion that my story, with its blend of sacred duty and whimsical detours, may one day serve as a quiet beacon for those who wander the winding paths of life, searching for meaning in a world that is as unpredictable and as beautifully absurd as the shifting northern skies. In every shared joke, every sincere laugh, and every moment of reflective solitude, I find the eternal truth that even the harshest days may birth a gentle smile. I have always believed that there is a sacred rhythm in the heart of existence, an endless dance between gravity and levity. And it is this dance that has carried me from the uncertain days of youth to the measured calm of my present. Even as I now watch the seasons change from the window of my snug cottage, I am well aware that the world outside continues its relentless tumult, echoing both the tragedies of old and the warm, unexpected bursts of human mirth. I often think of the raiding days, the raucous clashes, and thunderous oaths, and it amazes me how amid the clang of sword upon shield and the somber prayers to Odin and Thor, there persevered a delicate humor, a cosmic chuckle, if you will, at the sheer improbability of our endeavors. I remember once, during a particularly fierce battle near the shores of a rugged fjord, how an enemy warrior, cloaked in rage and ambition, lunged towards me only to stumble over a stray root, a root that I later learned belonged, in legend, to an ancient tree said to have whispered secrets to the gods. His fall was as spectacular as it was accidental, and for a fleeting moment, even the gravity of battle gave way to an almost contagious laughter among our ranks. It was as if fate itself had decided that even in the throes of mortal conflict, there must remain some space for the ridiculous. I confess that the memory still brings a soft smile to my weathered face, a reminder that the divine plan is never altogether serious, no matter how dire the circumstances might appear. Now I sit and reminisce over these experiences with the soft glow of candlelight dancing along the parchment, my mind adrift in the delicate interplay of honor and jest. The winds outside carry whispers of days long gone, yet each breeze seems to brush against me as a gentle reminder of the unity of all things, joy and sorrow, myth and history, and the realization that in this grand tapestry of life, every twist of fate has its own unique humor. Whether through an unexpected misstep on a battlefield, the capricious pranks of wandering spirits, or the simple knowing smile of a child who has yet to learn the weight of destiny, humor has always been the unspoken gift that comforted and sustained us through our darkest hours. In these quiet reflections, I find a deep contentment, a serene assurance that the legacy of our people is as much about the heartfelt resilience in times of suffering as it is about the unexpected laughter that rises in defiance of sorrow. My journey as a shaman has been a pilgrimage of both spirit and irony, a path that demanded I confront death, embrace hardship, and yet with each new challenge, find a glimpse of joy tucked away in the crevices of existence. I carry these stories like treasured runes etched into my soul, each one a testament to a time when the world was a swirling mosaic of chaos and beauty, a time when the gods would both smite and smile upon us in equal measure. As I now approach the gentle end of my days, I am ever mindful that the tales I share are not merely chronicles of battles fought or rituals performed, but rather living memories imbued with the ineffable spark of humor that has seen me through a long and unpredictable life. In each recollection, I find a measure of absolution, a soft understanding that while fate may be harsh and unyielding, it is also, at its heart, a playful trickster. And so I continue to write, to speak, and to laugh quietly at the mirror of my own past, trusting that in these humble retellings there lies not only the wisdom of ages long gone, but also the tender promise that even in the bleakest winters, the human spirit is forever capable of finding light, warmth, and a well-timed laugh. Thus I tell you my story, dear listener, as a gentle lullaby to the weary soul, a narrative not of unrelenting brutality alone, but of moments of absurdity that have punctuated the march of history with their soft, irreverent charm. The life of a Viking, Shaman, after all, is not merely a litany of sorrow and strife, but a mosaic composed of both the scars of battle and the laughter that followed in its wake. And in the quiet corners of my memory, where the years have settled like a soft moss upon my heart, I remain ever grateful to the gods for teaching me that in every echo of ancient war cries, in every whispered incantation beneath the starry expanse, there lies a hidden jest, a cosmic wink that reminds us that no matter how harsh the road may be, we are never truly alone in our search for both meaning and the occasional unexpected smile. Now, as the embers of another day fade into the gentle embrace of night, I allow my thoughts to meander among the familiar contours of my past, each recollection a soft luminescence that guides me through the dark. I think of the many faces of my comrades, their features etched with memory and laughter, and of countless rituals that oscillated between the weight of divine invocation and the playful reprimand of destiny. It is as if every moment in my turbulent youth was a carefully placed jest by the fates, a reminder that even as we carved our paths through treacherous lands and confronted foes both mortal and supernatural, life had the uncanny ability to surprise us with its capacity for gentle humor. I have come to cherish this balance, knowing well that while the gales of war may threaten to uproot even the sturdiest of hearts, the soft laughter of a friend or even a mischievous spirit can serve as a lifeline afloat on turbulent seas. In my many meditations by the quiet streams and under the shelter of ancient pines, I have come to perceive that my journey, with all its hardships and humorous detours, is not an isolated tale, but a part of the endless saga of our people, a saga that spans the ages and binds us together with a shared heritage of resilience and joy. I now inscribe these words, not as a final farewell, but as a gentle invitation to all who wander the corridors of memory, urging them to seek the light amid the shadow, to find laughter amidst the tears, and to know that within each humble moment lies the spark of eternity. Thus I, Olaf the Shaman, continue to walk through the corridors of time, guided by both the stern lessons of battle and the kindly humor of chance mishaps. A path that leads ever onward toward the dawn of new stories and the quiet promise that even in a harsh world, the ability to find joy in the simplest of things is an art worth cherishing. And so, I rest now in the comforting knowledge that as long as the wind whispers through the trees and the waves lack gently upon the shore, the gentle laughter of the gods will echo in my spirit, a lullaby to carry me softly into the night, and perhaps, on some distant tomorrow, into yet another tale laden with both sorrow and the ineffable, heartwarming humor that has colored each step along this long and winding road. I remember, as I settle into my favorite creaking wooden chair by the fire on a quiet winter evening, the gentle, meandering tale of Olaf the Shaman, whose life in old Sweden was as filled with peculiar everyday ritual as it was with the fierce spirit of Viking raids. I once met a few old folks in my younger days who claimed to have heard whispers of his remarkable journeys, and I have kept their words in my memory like a cherished lullaby. In those days, when the nights were long and the wind seemed always to carry news of distant lands, Olaf's life unfolded in a series of humble, odd moments that might now seem inconsequential were it not for the quiet humor he found in the smallest of happenings. I first heard of Olaf when I was surveying ancient sagas in a dusty library tucked away in a sleepy corner of Sweden, where every heavy tome had the aroma of old parchment and faint hints of rosemary that someone had once pressed between the pages. There, amid the slow turning of pages and the murmur of distant rain against the stone window, the name Olaf shone like a meandering beam of moonlight on a quiet fjord. I recall thinking that his life, though drenched in the strangeness of Viking mysticism and the reek of freshly brewed mead, was also filled with such mundane detail that one might have mistaken it for an ordinary day of repairing a leaky thatched roof or sorting through a basket of newly gathered apples. Olaf was born on a crisp autumn day when the leaves danced lightly across the cold, dewy ground of our beloved southern Sweden. His village, a tightly knit community of hardy souls who prided themselves on both their robust raiding adventures and the unexpected pleasures of everyday life, was filled with that unique blend of daring and domesticity. I sometimes picture the villagers gathered in the great hall, themselves as much at home reciting epic sagas as they were debating the proper recipe for smoked herring, each matter treated with the same earnest gravity. Even then, it was clear that the path of destiny laid for Olaf was far from being a simple route. I know well the early days of Olaf's life, when he was still a quiet child, content with his small pleasures and simple routines. His mother, who was as formidable in her wisdom as she was gentle in her care, often told him that the spirit of the land could be heard in the wind, and that even the low murmur of a bubbling stream contained secrets of ages past. And so, from a tender age, Olaf learned to listen to the rustle of the birch leaves, to the distant call of the night raven, and to the soft clanging of the blacksmith's hammer at the edge of the village. Balancing these seemingly trivial auditory delights with the more somber expectations of his Viking destiny, he soon found that his path led him to walk the fine line between the mystical and the all-too-human. I may remiss to say that the early education of a would-be shaman was not all esoteric rites and solemn chants. In fact, when I reflect on the delicate balance of Olaf's life, I cannot help but smile at the memory of one particular winter when the young Olaf, then a mere apprentice to the ancient ways, inadvertently discovered that even sacred incantations might be interrupted by a rather unfortunate encounter with a misbehaving goose. In fact, during one of his many visits by the sacred stone, a smooth, private path that led him to learn the secrets. Weathered rock whose surface shone like amber in the diminishing light, Olaf attempted to commune with the gods. His incantations were soft and measured, floating in the cold air like whispered secrets. But just as he reached the most pensive part of his recitations, a distraught goose, annoyed by what it apparently took for granted, waddled undignified across the ritual circle and knocked over a half-burned stick of incense. The result was a minor conflagration that spread rapidly across the small clearing before being quenched by a panicked churning of water from a nearby spring. 500 milliseconds. I can only imagine, in some fabled corner of the afterlife, the gods chuckle softly at Olaf's expense, even as he later shrugged and remarked that perhaps nature itself was testing him to keep his humor in check. Time, as it does, moved on with a slow and steady rhythm. Much like the repetitive lapping of the waves against the rugged shore, Olaf grew into his role as both a shaman and a participant in the rough-and-tumble world of Viking raiders. His dual existence was a study in contrasts. On one hand, he was revered for his uncanny sense of the unseen and his ability to communicate with deities, who were as capricious as the distant northern lights. On the other hand, he was also a reliable companion for those in need of a hand to hoist a heavy oar or mend a broken shield after one of the more spirited raids. I have often mused that his true genius lay in his ability to merge the cosmic with the common, the eerie and the everyday, in a manner so seamless that both his fellow warriors and the celestial forces alike would nod in quiet approval. In many ways, the humor that followed Olaf was not the rib-tickling sort, destined to echo through a great hall during an ale-fueled feast, but rather an understated, droll amusement that came with the slow revelations of life, a smile shared in hushed moments before sleep, over a softly glowing hearth. It was his habit of noting the absurdity of life's tiny inconveniences that lent his character a depth rarely documented in the more boisterous records of Viking exploits. For instance, there was the day he decided that the appropriate ritual for pleasing the spirits involved a modest offering of a well-cooked herring, a meal that, in the hands of any ordinary man, might have been treated as a simple repast. Olaf, however, arranged the fish with such care that he even attempted to balance it upon a polished stone, as if that small gesture could convey his reverence for the gods, who surely appreciated culinary artistry. The result, naturally, was a comical fiasco, for the fish had not meant to perform such acrobatics and promptly flopped into a nearby vat of fermenting apple juice, producing a cascade of aromas that wafted unpredictably across the village. In the aftermath, as he attempted to salvage what dignity might remain, even the gods, it was said, could not help but smile at the quirky nature of human and divine affairs. I recall a particularly serene autumn in which the scent of burning pine and fresh snowfall seemed to mingle perfectly in the chill air. That season, the village was preparing for a major raid, one that had been planned for many months and was spoken of in hushed tones by the longhouses. Olaf, ever the mediator between the mundane and the mystical, was charged with performing a blessing over the entire raid party. This was not a simple matter, for the ritual required that he first carefully mix a concoction of herbal infusions and water from a sacred spring. I remember him spending an entire afternoon in his modest hut, grinding herbs with a mortar made of stone, a process so deliberate that one could easily have mistaken it for an intricate art project rather than a matter of life and death. With each slow, methodical grind, he mused aloud on the virtues of patience, both in brewing and in the conduct of raids, commenting that even the finest blade must be worn down by time if it were ever to tell the secrets of the battlefield. His quiet observations, shared with a calm smile, remind me now that even those engaged in epic adventures take solace in the smallest of tasks. A lesson I find particularly comforting on nights when the winds outside seem to whisper of lives long past. As the day of the raid arrived, the village gathered in a shared sense of both excitement and trepidation. I imagine Olaf standing at the threshold of his doorway, wrapped in a tunic that had seen better days, yet still carried the faint traces of his mother's careful embroidery. His eyes held a quiet twinkle, as if he were privy to some cosmic joke that the rest of us had yet to understand. He made his way through the bustling streets and onto the dimly lit outskirts of the village, where rough-hewn longships, their prows carved with mythical beasts, bobbed gently in the harbor. The sea itself seemed to hold its breath as the warriors prepared to set forth, and even in that charged atmosphere, I can see Olaf taking a moment to pause by a small patch of wildflowers, admiring their resilience in a landscape so frequently marred by the weight of destiny. Throughout the voyage, Olaf maintained his customary calm, while the rest of the crew exchanged lively banter and boisterous boasts of future conquests. He remained slightly apart, his eyes occasionally drifting towards the enigmatic horizon. He would hum softly to himself, a low refrain that sounded remarkably like a lullaby for the wind. It was during these quiet moments that his fellow raiders, hardened as they were by the perils of battle, murmured among themselves that perhaps Olaf's spirit was more attuned to the natural world than to the rigors of combat. Yet, as history has a way of showing us, the most unassuming souls often wield the most profound influence. Olaf's presence on the ship was a source of subtle reassurance, a steady reminder that amid the chaos of life, one might still find moments of gentle beauty and unexpected humor. I often reflect on the incident that became known among the crew as the Day of the Misplaced Helm, a tale recounted with a soft chuckle even in the quiet aftermath of distant conquests. As our longship navigated a narrow channel where the water was as cold and clear as melted glass, Olaf, whose concentration had been particularly deep that day, failed to secure his weathered leather helm properly. A sudden gust, playful in its timing, lifted the helm from his head and sent it sailing across the deck like a rogue flying saucer. For a moment, there was silence, punctuated only by the ambient creaks of timbers and the soft lapping of the water against the hull. One of the burly warriors, a man with a reputation for both strength and a surprisingly mild sense of mischief, hoisted the helm with a grand flourish, declaring it a sign, a message from the mysterious powers Olaf so often conversed with. Laughter followed, subdued and warm, as the crew marveled at how even the smallest missteps could, in their own way, become omens for future success. Olaf merely raised an eyebrow, and with his characteristically gentle humor, remarked that perhaps the gods were simply advising him to invest in a better fastening system. It was on many such occasions that I have found solace in the notion that life, in its endless twists and turns, sometimes prefers the quiet. Unassuming joke over the bombastic display of heroism, Olaf's existence was defined by his ability to cherish the simple moments as much as the grand ones, a quality that I believe made him a philosopher in his own right. In one of the quieter evenings of his later years, when the scars of battles were etched not only on his skin, but also in the murmurs of his memory, he once sat beneath the sprawling canopy of an ancient oak. It is said that he whispered secrets to the tree, secrets that only the night and the stars could truly understand. I like to imagine him tracing the delicate lines of bark with his calloused fingers, noting, almost in a whisper himself, how the tree's form resembled a map rather than a mere living organism. He would recount, with a tone that was both amused and wistful, how the tree reminded him of the winding paths of life, a path that, no matter how determined one might be to follow its course, always seemed to delight in the unexpected tangents and compulsory pauses for reflection. Even after countless campaigns and amidst numerous raids, there was perhaps never a single day that did not offer him a fresh tableau of small absurdities to observe. I recall a story that has drifted down the ages, a gentle reminder that the divine and the mundane can intersect in the most unexpected ways. One fine morning, when frost still clung to the emerging buds of spring, and the village was but a cluster of rooftops gently dusted with white, Olaf set out on one of his usual walks through the dew-drenched fields. His mind was preoccupied with thoughts of the previous night's ritual, a particularly elaborate ceremony that had involved the delicate balancing of several items of symbolic significance. As he ambled along, he noticed that one of the rabbits had conveniently chosen the freshly tilled ground right where he had left his small satchel. The creature, seemingly intent on its own mysterious agenda, had created a series of tiny, meandering tracks that threatened to upend the careful arrangement of his offerings. With a quiet chuckle and a twinkle in his eye, Olaf sat down beside the tracks and murmured, in a tone both resigned and tenderly amused, that even nature's small residents had a way of reminding him that perfection was an illusion best left to the imaginings of poets and idealists. This gentle acceptance of life's inherent imperfections, expressed in such unassuming moments, was perhaps his private form of wisdom, a small, serene rebellion against the relentless tide of fate. As the years progressed, Olaf's reputation spread far beyond the boundaries of his village. His unique blend of intense ritualistic practice and an eye for everyday oddities made him a figure both revered and affectionately ridiculed. It was said that in distant lands, the whisper of his name would cause even the most hardened warriors to pause, if only to smile at an account of an ancient incantation interrupted by an untimely barnyard escapade. I have come to cherish these tales, not as mere relics of a bygone era, but as delicate portraits of a man who managed to bridge the unfathomable gulf between the sweeping cosmic forces and the trifling concerns of human existence. In taverns lit by flickering torches, where the echoes of roaring laughter mingled with the soft croon of a distant skald, bards would often pause to recount how Olaf once insisted on keeping a detailed journal of his daily encounters with both spirits and stray livestock. One such entry, now almost legendary in its simplicity, noted that the spirits, it appeared, had an inexplicable preference for the aroma of freshly baked barley bread, a detail that, while thoroughly mundane, offered the villagers a peculiar sense of connection between their daily bread and the mysteries of the beyond. I must confess that in my later meditations, while sifting through the dusty fragments of those ancient journals, I found myself enchanted by the relentless mixture of gravitas and gentle absurdity that permeated every line. There was a certain beauty in the way Olaf could recount the grand mysteries of life with the same clear-eyed account of the time his favorite traveling cloak had been chucked aside by an errant seagull. Such anecdotes, though trivial in isolation, assembled themselves into a mosaic of modest triumphs and understated camaraderie, a patchwork that spoke volumes of the delicate art of living. With each crackling spark of a fire, or the soft patter of rain on a wooden roof, I am reminded of how Olaf's life, in all its winding glory, epitomized the idea that even the monumental is best savored when set alongside the everyday rituals that give it warmth and charm. There was also, I recall with a smile, one expedition that found Olaf engaged in a rather unexpected act of culinary experimentation in the midst of a grandiose raiding expedition. The band of warriors had, as was customary, pillaged a neighboring settlement, gathering not only treasures, but also an assortment of exotic ingredients. It so happened that Olaf's interest was piqued by the sight of a rare plant, its leaves shimmering with a peculiar iridescence, which local lore claimed was known to heighten one's spiritual perceptions. Seizing the opportunity of the moment, he decided to incorporate the plant into a dish, a stew, really, that he believed would both sustain the warriors and possibly open their minds to the divine whispers of the gods. As the cauldron bubbled over an open flame on the shore, the aroma soon became a topic of much mirth among the band. In between hearty gulps of ale and boisterous contests of bravery, the warriors remarked on how Olaf seemed to have inadvertently prepared the world's most unconventional recipe. That evening, while the taste of the stew mingled unpredictably with the salty tang of the sea breeze, the laughter of hardened fighters resonated softly against the gentle lapping of the water. It was in these moments, I suspect, that even the gods took pause to share in the simple absurdity of mortal innovation on the battlefield. I have often wondered, in the quiet cadence of a midnight reverie, whether the humor that radiated from Olaf's soul was a deliberate act, a measured counterpoint to the gravity of a life steeped in both ancient magic and the constant threat of violence. Perhaps it was his way of acknowledging that, within the finite span of human existence, one must navigate not only the perilous storms of fate, but also the inconveniences of a misfiring apron or a missing cooking pot. In any case, his manner has left me with the enduring impression that laughter, softly shared and quietly appreciated, might serve as one of the noblest rituals of all. I often imagine him later in life, reclined by a roaring fire in a secluded glen, far from the cries of battle, his eyes twinkling in the fading light as he recounted another humorous misadventure to a cluster of attentive listeners, perhaps a motley crew of children, or even a solitary wolf whose ears perked just at the right moment to catch a tale. His gentle cadence, as he recounted tales of raiding mishaps, juxtaposed with the unpredictable antics of nature, had a way of lulling even the most restless hearts into a state of peace. In the later decades of his life, when his remarkable journey had been chronicled in nearly every sagacious scroll and whispered by elders in half-forgotten villages, Olaf turned increasingly toward introspection. He began to see the threads of his existence as woven into a pattern that was less about conquests and more about the quiet interplay between destiny and the quotidian. On one particularly mellow afternoon, as the sun spilled its gentle golden light over the rugged hills of his native land, he retired to a modest dwelling nestled beside a silently glimmering lake. There, with a well-worn bowl of simple porridge steaming gently at his side, he would watch the reflections of clouds drift lazily across the water, each formation a fleeting work of art in the vast gallery of the sky. I find it most reassuring to consider that even a life as storied as his was not solely defined by feats of bravery, but equally by moments of solitary communion with the mundane, the taste of warm porridge, the caress of the soft breeze, and the sound of his own measured breathing in the stillness of the afternoon. In these quieter moments, he occasionally penned his thoughts in a weathered journal, his hand slow and deliberate as he recorded the interplay of nature, memory, and the hint of a smile at the world's enduring quirks. One entry, in particular, has lingered in the annals of my recollections. He wrote of a day when he had embarked on a solitary walk through a dense forest whose bounds were marked by trees older than time itself. In his meticulous, unhurried prose, he described how a fallen branch, spotted with moss and smudged with the fleeting colors of autumn, had crossed his path, a humble reminder that greatness often hides in the unassuming details. He mused that this branch, discarded by the inexorable march of the seasons, might one day serve as the perch for a weary bird, and in that simple act there was a quiet beauty that elevated the mundane to the level of art. The gentle irony of it all did not escape him. Even nature, in all its wild splendor, had its own sense of humor, a soft acknowledgement that nothing, not even destiny, was ever quite as serious as it might appear at first glance. I must also share the account of a winter's eve so cold that even the stars appeared to shiver as they peered down upon the earth. The village, bundled in layers of wool and furs, huddled together for warmth, and the great hall was filled with the low murmur of conversation, punctuated by occasional fits of laughter over a shared memory of some long-remembered mishap. Olaf, never one to be exempt from the comfort of shared warmth, took it upon himself to offer a tale that was as simultaneously somber and subtly hilarious. In a voice that was both resonant and softly mocking of the very seriousness that warriors often wore like armor, he recounted an incident from his youth, how on one particularly frigid day, his attempt to start a sacred fire had resulted in a cascade of sparks that, much to his chagrin, set alight not only a prepared bundle of offerings, but also inadvertently the striped trousers of one of his more ostentatious companions. The incident, as he described it, was a lesson in the delicate balance between ritual and reality, a balance that, while often precarious, was not without its measure of absurdity. Even now, as I remember that night, I can envisage the way the flickering light cast elongated shadows that danced like mischievous imps across the walls, each spark a tiny burst of levity in a cold, otherwise grim night. There is much to be said, I find, about the enduring nature of memory. how even after centuries have passed, the small, inconsequential moments become the threads that bind us to those who have walked the earth before us. Olaf's life, with its blend of ritualistic gravity and understated humor, serves as a gentle reminder that even in the midst of great deeds and dire omens, there lies an invitation to pause and appreciate those small, serene moments. I often reflect on the way he would pause during a thunderous battle, his eyes wandering upward as if searching for a sign in the shifting clouds, before returning to share a wry smile with his comrades. These shared smiles, so quiet and fleeting, were the true currency of hope, small beacons that lit the darkness of the long winter nights and warmed the hearts of those who had braved countless storms. It was in the twilight of his years that Olaf came to understand that the measure of a life was not found solely in the volume of grand deeds, nor in the echo of heroic ballads that outlived the man who sang them, but rather in the steady cadence of everyday wonder. I have often thought of the times when, sitting by a modest fire on a cool, crisp evening, he would recount to a small circle of attentive villagers, not the ferocity of his many raids, but rather, with a twinkle in his eye, the curious way in which the morning frost decorated the simple windowpane of his hut, each icicle a tiny sculpture wrought by nature's quiet hands. In his gentle, unhurried tone, he spoke of the unpretentious joy found in the cracked surface of a well-worn drinking mug, and in the steadfast rhythm of the seasons, so meticulously observed and recorded in his faded scrolls. These were, he would say, the true treasures of a life well lived, treasures not measured by the glitter of plunder, but by the warmth of silent moments, and the soft cadence of a life in harmony with both the divine and the everyday. Now, as I sit here and allow the gentle strains of memory to lull me into the present twilight, I'm reminded of the many evenings when Olaf's stories echoed softly in the quiet corridors of my mind. His was a life woven from the same substance as the long shadows of a solitary oak at dusk, a tapestry stitched together with threads of mystical wonder and the simple, unassuming truths of everyday existence. It is a life that teaches me, even on the darkest of nights, to find solace in the small victories, a well-rolled pinch of salt, the accidental tumble of a misplaced helmet, or even the unexpected marinating of herring in a vat of apple juice. Each of these moments, as insignificant as they may seem, is imbued with a quiet humor and a gentle reminder that the vast tapestry of destiny is not only made up of grand battles and sacred rituals, but also of those trivial, inconspicuous capers that, in their own quiet way, spark a warm smile across the face of time. I find, with a sense of deep, measured affection, that the legacy of Olaf endures not in the thunderous roar of battle or in the lofty recitations of epic poets, but rather in the soft continuity of a well-spoken word at the close of day. It is in the subtle art of finding beauty in the quotidian, a truth that can be discovered with unpretentious sincerity in both the ceremonial practices of an ancient shaman and in the unexpected misadventures of a temperamental goose. In remembering him, I am comforted by the notion that our lives, too, are enriched by these small, often unsung moments of comedy and calm. After all, what is history, if not a slow, measured series of human experiences, each one as delicate and ephemeral as a snowflake drifting silently toward the earth? There have been many a midnight when I have sat in quiet reflection, pondering the lessons imparted by Olaf's gentle, sometimes absurd perspective on life. In these reflective hours, when the world outside seems to hold its breath under a velvet sky studded with luminous stars, I allow myself to be carried along by the timeless cadence of his memories. I imagine him far removed from the tumult of long-forgotten battles, sitting by a modest hearth in a solitary cabin, crowned by the wild northern lights. There, with a cup of mead in hand, A brew so carefully prepared, it could only have been the work of a man intimately acquainted with both the sacred arts and the inevitable foibles of fate. He would hum a tune both hopeful and wistful. I picture him softly recounting, to a small audience of attentive forest creatures and perhaps the occasional curious human traveler, how the majesty of the gods was reflected in the simple act of sharing a meal, or in the comforting rhythm of the seasons. There, in the whispering silence of that remote hideaway, his voice would mingle with the natural world, a tender reminder that even in the wildest of storms, there fills the possibility of calm and unexpected laughter. And so I continue to trace the gentle arc of Olaf's life, his story unfolding with the steady patience of a slow river that meanders through ancient, time-worn valleys. I have come to believe that his legacy is a quiet invitation to look beyond the surface of heroic exploits and to see instead the rich mosaic of small acts and soft murmurs that truly define our days. In the quiet interludes between battles and rituals, in the accidental flights of flying headgear, and in the way a simple herb might transform into a revered object of ritualistic intrigue, lies the true measure of our existence, a measure that, when savored slowly, reveals itself to be as nourishing and profound as any grand epic ever recounted by bards in the flickering light of a mead-soaked hall. I have long reflected on how the art of storytelling, when imbued with a gentle mixture of respect for the past and amused acceptance of its quirks, becomes a kind of soft medicine, a potion that helps us to confront the often overwhelming vastness of history with a knowing smile. Olaf, in all his peculiar, gentle, and occasionally absurd glory, embodied that very spirit. His life was a testament to the idea that a moment of laughter, however slight or seemingly trivial, holds the power to soothe even the most battle-scarred soul. I have found that this simple truth, repeated over and over in the quiet cadence of his stories, offers a kind of balm for restless hearts, a reminder that sometimes the most profound insights come not from the clamor of great deeds, but from the soft, undemonstrative moments that, collectively, form the beat of everyday life. In my own years of wandering among the quiet lapses of time and listening to the hush of distant streams, I have come to treasure those narratives of Olaf as if they were whispered confessions of a kindred spirit. It seems to me that, in the constellation of human experience, his gentle humor and willingness to find joy amid chaos shine as steadily as the northern star. His was a life in which the great and the small coexisted in quiet harmony, a blend that, even today, casts a warm glow on those of us fortunate enough to remember it. Perhaps, in recalling these memories, it is precisely this tender interplay between destiny and the minutiae of daily life that offers us the solace to drift into a peaceful slumber, cradled by the soft murmur of time and the distant echoes of a shaman's gentle laughter. I often find myself returning to the image of Olaf, seated at the water's edge on a cool evening, his weathered face illuminated by the reflective glow of the lake and the scattered light of a full moon. In that quiet moment, he would speak softly of the days when the world was both larger and yet inexplicably smaller, a paradox that only those who have witnessed the deep mysteries of life can truly comprehend. His words, each imbued with the calm assurance of nature itself, evoked a sense of timeless continuity, as if he were part of a story that had been unfolding since the first spark of creation. In his measured cadence, I could hear not just the muted pulse of ancient rituals, but also the soft echoes of laughter shared in the intimate company of friends, the kind of laughter that warms the soul as much as any heroic feat might. Even as I recount these memories, I realize that Olaf's story is not simply a record of past adventures or mystical encounters. It is also a gentle guide, a reminder that the tapestry of our own lives is composed of countless small, interconnected moments. There is a certain beauty in the monotony of daily chores, a beauty that is often overlooked in the rush of ambition and the pursuit of grand triumphs. Yet it is in this quiet rhythm, this unhurried procession of sunrises followed by equally predictable sunsets, that we find the true pulse of existence. I have observed, in the soft glow of many a twilight, that the smallest actions, a nod of acknowledgement, a shared smile over an accidental mishap, a softly spoken word of reassurance, can carry within them the promise of hope, the promise of a new day. And it is this promise that, like Olaf's gentle musings, endures far longer than the fleeting clamor of heroic exploits ever could. There was another episode, one that I recall with a fond and slightly amused heart, in which Olaf once found himself engaged in what he later described with a wistful chuckle as an unexpected lesson in humility. During a long winter raid deep into the forested lands north of our village, the icy terrain became particularly treacherous. The warriors, accustomed to the sturdy embrace of land and sea, encountered a veritable obstacle course of slippery stones and treacherous ice patches. Amidst this hazardous endeavor, Olaf, with his usual detached serenity, had taken it upon himself to ensure that the spirits of the land were not offended by what might be perceived as human clumsiness. He paused frequently to invoke the blessings of the frost spirits, all the while carefully navigating the frozen ground. On one such pause, as he recited an incantation about the honor of enduring the cold, he found his footing betrayed him by a particularly mischievous patch of ice. In a moment that was as sudden as it was inevitable, he tumbled in a slow, almost balletic cascade, his arms flailing helplessly as he slid gracefully, if not comically, across the surface until he came to rest in a snowbank not far from where his comrades struggled to regain their balance. The warriors, ever the stoic and resilient lot, could not help but burst into soft, appreciative laughter at the sight. Even as he gathered himself and brushed the snow from his tunic, Olaf merely smiled and remarked that the incident served as a quiet reminder of the capricious nature of both the earth and fate. A reminder, too, that one must never take oneself too seriously, even when the gods themselves might be silently amused by your plight. In the gentle progression of days and nights that followed, that particular tumble became a charming part of local lore, a gentle recurring motif in a saga filled with both great deeds and small glittering moments of levity. I have often found it a comforting thought that in the grand scheme of things, it is precisely these moments of minor misadventure that lend the greatest color to our recollections, painting the gray canvas of time with strokes of unexpected mirth. For every battle fought and every ritual performed, there exists an equally tender vignette, a fleeting instance of humor that once passed leaves behind a warm residue of human connection and shared experience. And so it is that the life of Olaf, with all its luminous details and understated absurdities, remains etched in my mind as break time 500 milliseconds, a reminder that the vast tapestry of our existence is woven as much from the soft threads of quiet laughter as it is from the bold fibers of destiny. Now, as the embers in my hearth dwindle to a soft orange glow, and the midnight air carries with it the whispered echoes of ancient lore, I allow my thoughts to meander back to those long-forgotten days of daring raids and mystic incantations. I recall how Olaf, ever the gentle chronicler of life's paradoxes, once shared his musings on how the passing of time transforms even the most formidable challenges into mere anecdotes, tiny snippets of narrative thread that, when woven together, form a larger, comforting story. He would say, in a voice that seemed to resonate with the quiet pulse of the universe itself, that each wrinkle on one's face was not merely a mark of age, but rather a tender map of all the moments in which one had, however fleetingly, laughed in the face of adversity. Such a perspective, delicate in its simplicity and profound in its truth, offers a solace that is both timeless and immediate, a gentle reminder that no matter how vast the darkness of the night, there is always the soft light of memory to guide us home. I find comfort in the idea that the spirit of Olaf continues to wander, not only in the annals of history, but also in the quiet corners of our hearts, where the laughter he once shared with the world lingers like a gentle, reassuring murmur. As I prepare to allow my own thoughts to settle into the soft embrace of sleep, I imagine that somewhere, in the hush of a winter night or the tender glow of a summer dusk, his gentle humor and profound presence continue to inspire those willing to listen to the secret language of life, a language composed not solely of heroic deeds and majestic legends, but also of the small, quiet miracles that make up the soul of our everyday existence. I remember the early chill of dawn when I, Olaf, first truly understood the peculiar rhythm of life in the rugged lands of Sweden. I was born in a modest longhouse nestled beside a fjord that shimmered under the low northern sun, its quiet lapping against the rocky shore as constant and gentle as the beating of my own heart. My childhood was a slow unfolding of days that merged into months, filled with the simple tasks of fetching water, tending to meager livestock, and listening to the elders recount tales of ancient gods and mysterious spirits. Even then, I sensed that I was destined for something more, though at the time I could never have imagined that destiny would carry me down winding paths of both raiding and ritual, despair and delight. On one particularly crisp morning, with the dew still clinging to the blades of grass like tiny jewels, I awoke with the strange conviction that the day held secrets waiting to be uncovered. I dressed in simple garments, rough-spun wool and leather boots worn smooth by years of travel, and ventured outside, greeted by the warm, slightly salty tang of the fjord air. The ancient trees that lined our village seemed to whisper amongst themselves as I passed, urging me onward with gentle rustlings that one could almost interpret as laughter. There was a certain humor in the way nature conspired with my fate. The rustle of leaves seemed to coax out a smile even on days when my spirit was heavy with the weight of responsibilities. As a shaman in our Viking clan, I bore the responsibility of bridging the world of mortals and the realm of the gods, a task I carried out with equal parts solemnity and a bemused sense of irony. I often found it amusing how seriously people took matters of fate and destiny. Yet the wind itself seemed to conspire in fate as it swept across the meadows and swung the creaking sign of our village. I recall one such incident when I was leading a ritual near the ancient stone circle at the forest's edge. The wind, of all things, decided to play a trick on me by snatching my ceremonial cloak and flinging it onto a nearby goat, who promptly strutted off, as if to announce itself the new high priest of the herd. Even then, I could not help but chuckle at the absurdity of the cosmic joke, finding solace in the lightness that followed the initial shock. It was not solely humor that filled my days as I carried the mantle of both mystic and warrior. Life in Viking Sweden, amid the uncertainty of raiding seasons, was a blend of trance-like meditation and the bracing reality of conflict. I remember vividly one incident when our village was preparing for an expedition across the sea. The air thick with anticipation and the smell of salted meat. I stood alongside my comrades, whose robust laughter and gruff chatter filled the longhouse as we readied our longboats. Despite the hardened exteriors and fierce demeanors, there was an unspoken understanding that beneath it all lay hearts equally capable of tenderness and reflection. As we set sail into the vast, unpredictable expanse of the ocean, I felt the dual pull of destiny and duty. I chanted softly to the gods, my words a low murmur almost lost in the rhythmic crash of the waves, hoping to summon favor and perhaps a moment of levity amidst the looming specters of battle. I remember particularly the voyage to distant shores where the clamor of battle was balanced by moments of striking mundanity. In one small, windswept cove, after a fierce encounter with a rival band, we discovered ourselves with enough time to share a meal over a modest fire. I recall the simple joy of roasting fish caught that very morning, the aroma mingling with the smoky scent of burning driftwood. There was a gentle humor in our conversation. A burly warrior with more scars than teeth tried to mimic the delicate motions of preparing the fish, his attempts eliciting hearty laughs that echoed around our little gathering. In that moment, under a sky festooned with stars and with the gentle hiss of break time 500 milliseconds, the sea, I felt that the connection between our ferocious way of life and the simple acts of living was not so contradictory after all. My role as shaman naturally required me to often visit the sacred groves and isolated glens, where the fabric between the mortal realm and the spirit world was whisper thin. I often wandered to these places with a simple satchel carrying lavender, juniper berries, and a bundle of carefully wrapped herbs, all chosen with great care, both for their medicinal properties and, on occasion, through the subtle humor of their names. I recall one serene afternoon when, deep in the forest, I encountered a remarkably curious squirrel who seemed fascinated by the bundle I carried. It followed me for a while, tossing its head as if to inspect my herbs more closely, before finally scurrying away with all the solemnity of a creature on a secret mission. The unexpected companionship warmed my heart, and I mused that even nature showed moments of delightful mischief. It was in these small details, such as the playful antics of a woodland creature or the gentle murmur of the wind through ancient pines, that I found inspiration for my chants and spells, each a quiet ode to life in its most unpretentious form. Over time, I came to experience several mysteries that underscored the peculiar tapestry of fate woven into every moment of my life. One winter, when the nights stretched long and the world outside our village was blanketed in shimmering frost, I embarked on a journey deep into the forest to seek visions in the silence of the snow-laden landscape. I built a small fire in a clearing, its flames dancing like mischievous sprites against the encroaching darkness. As I meditated, urged forward by the quiet hum of the night, I was unexpectedly visited by the spirit of a long-departed ancestor. This spectral presence, dressed in antiquated armor and carrying a rather grandiose spear, spoke of battles long past and of secrets hidden beneath layers of time and snow. His voice carried the timbre of both solemn command and subtle jest, perhaps gently chiding me for forgetting to feed the village cat or for misplacing my morning cup of gruel. The humor in his words was as unexpected as the sight of a ghost dressed in a wayward mix of regalia and everyday clutter, and it reminded me that even the most venerable spirits found solace in a light-hearted reminder of life's absurdities. As the seasons turned, and my journey as a shaman and raider continued, the intermingling of destiny and daily life began to reveal itself in the simplest of occurrences. I remember one particular summer when our village celebrated a feast marking both the end of a fruitful harvest and the preparation for another imminent raid. The festivities were marked by abundant laughter, the clatter of wooden cups, and the rhythmic strumming of a lute played by an elder who claimed to have been a court minstrel in a far-off land. I sat among my fellow clansmen and women, my thoughts wandering between prayer and wistfulness, as I observed how the ordinary moments of joy were interwoven with our more strenuous pursuits. The feast was punctuated by a peculiar incident in which a stray chicken, a creature whose errant nature was the subject of many a jest, managed to dart between the revelers, causing a ripple of laughter and mild indignation. It was in these moments that I wondered if the gods themselves had a hand in crafting such ironic twists of fate, weaving humor into the fabric of our lives, much like the threads of a well-worn tapestry. My path as a Viking shaman, steeped in ancient wisdom and the raw energy of natural forces, was by no means without its quieter moments of contemplation and domesticity. On many an evening after the day's arduous activities, whether returning from a successful raid or from an introspective journey into the wild, I would return to my modest dwelling. The longhouse was a place of gentle routine, a low fire burning in the hearth, a table set with simple fare, and a bed that smelled faintly of straw and the faint aroma of herbs I had once used in ritual cleansing. I would sit by the crackling embers, often in the company of my faithful hound, reflecting on the odd mixture of danger and routine that so characterized my existence. There was a steadfast comfort in those moments, a quiet affirmation that even in a life as volatile as that of a Viking shaman, peace was to be found in the familiar cadence of everyday tasks. I would sometimes regale myself with memories of my early initiations into the mystic arts, recalling the careful incantations and the even more deliberate brewing of herbal mixtures. My mentor, a wise and slightly eccentric elder named Torsten, had taught me that the secret to a successful ritual lay not solely in the precise utterance of ancient words, but in the genuine embrace of life's imperfections. I often chuckled when remembering how, as an eager pupil, I would accidentally mix the wrong herbs into a supposed love potion, resulting instead in a concoction that made everyone in the vicinity break into uncontrollable fits of laughter, a potion one might call the elixir of merriment. Such mishaps, while embarrassing in their moment, eventually molded me into a shaman who appreciated the comedic timing inherent in life's most unexpected turns. It was a lesson in not taking oneself too seriously, a lesson that served me well as I navigated both the spiritual and the martial realms. In time, my reputation as a shaman grew far beyond the boundaries of our modest village. Tales of my peculiar blend of solemn ritual and wry humor began to circulate, carried by traveling skalds and whispered in the bustling market squares of far-off towns. I found that my services were oft requested, not only by those seeking guidance in battle or solace during times of sorrow, but also by those eager to experience the lighter side of divine intervention. I remember being summoned to a nobleman's estate on the misty banks of a winding river, where I was tasked with performing a ritual meant to bless the harvest and, much to everyone's amusement, to also ensure that the livestock would refrain from misbehaving during the feast. The ritual involved intricate prayers, the careful arrangement of wildflowers, and a dance that required me to mimic the slow, ponderous movements of a reindeer. The resulting performance, a comical yet respectful display of my art, left the assembly in fits of laughter, and the nobleman insisted that the resulting harvest was blessed indeed, not only with bountiful crops, but with an abundance of merriment that lasted through the season. Despite the humor and the light-hearted moments, there were also episodes of profound introspection that marked my journey. I recall one autumn when the chill in the air deepened and the days grew shorter. Amidst the rustling leaves and the fading light, I found myself grappling with questions that transcended the immediate concerns of raiding and ritual. The weight of generations of tradition pressed upon me as I wandered the ancient burial mounds, paying homage to the spirits of those who had come before. Even in these somber moments, however, a subtle humor, an undercurrent beneath the melancholy, tinged my reflections. I would often muse on how the solemnity of the proper farewell was invariably punctuated by the unexpected antics of birds or the peculiar arrangement of stones. Perhaps, I thought, the ancestors themselves had a playful streak, whispering cosmic jokes from the netherworld with every gust of wind that shook the trees. It was in such quiet hours that I reconciled the dual aspects of my calling, the fierce warrior and the gentle mediator between worlds. There were occasions, too, when my dual nature brought me into contact with fate in the most unpredictable of ways. Once, during a particularly vigorous raid on a coastal settlement, I found myself separated from my comrades amidst the chaos of clashing swords and roaring battle cries. Lost in the aftermath of the skirmish, I wandered the seashore, guided by the light of a half-hidden moon and the strange hum of the tide. As I paced along the slick rocks, pondering the twists that fate had dealt me, I encountered a figure, a wandering minstrel with a lute slung over his shoulder and a mischievous glimmer in his eye. The minstrel, whose name I later learned was Bjorn, offered to share his meager provisions of bread and dried fish in exchange for tales of my miraculous encounters and mystic adventures. Our conversation soon turned from the gravity of lost comrades to the absurdity of the situation. Here, in the midst of a ruined battlefield, two men found solace in the simple pleasure of shared bread and a few soft laughs. Bjorn's witty observations about the irony of fate and his insistence that even battlefields could be improved with a bit of cheerful repartee reminded me that laughter was often the best remedy for the burdens of destiny. My travels eventually took me through many parts of the rugged Scandinavian wilderness, from dense, whispering forests to windswept meadows, and from craggy mountain passes to the calm, reflective surfaces of hidden lakes. In each locale, I found both the haunting beauty of nature and the gentle absurdity of life waiting to be discovered. I once found myself traversing a dense pine forest, so silent that even a falling pine cone might have stirred an uproar. As I made my slow way along a narrow footpath, I came upon a clearing where an old, gnarled oak tree stood sentinel. Beneath its sprawling branches, a family of beavers busily constructed a dam, their industrious efforts filled with a gravity that ought to have precluded any sense of play. Yet as I watched, one particularly daring beaver, seemingly dissatisfied with the standard building techniques of its kin, performed a series of acrobatic leaps that defied the slow, measured pace of nature. The sight, both absurd and enchanting, brought a smile to my face and reminded me that even within the strict confines of nature's order, there existed moments of delightful rebellion. In the quiet interludes between grand adventures and intense rituals, I began to understand that the true magic of being a Viking shaman lay not in extraordinary feats or divine interventions alone, but also in the tranquil beauty of everyday experiences. Mornings spent watching the interplay of light and shadow on frost-covered fields, evenings marked by the soft murmur of distant waterfalls, and nights filled with dreams that I later shared with an irreverent chuckle with my closest friends. All these things wove together the fabric of a life that was as unpredictable as it was serene. I often likened my existence to the gentle, steady flow of a mountain stream. It meandered through the rugged terrain of conflicts and celebrations alike, nourishing the land with its quiet persistence and reminding me that even the mightiest of rivers began as a small trickle. There were moments during my life when the demands of duty seemed overwhelming, when the weight of destiny and the ceaseless cycle of raids and rituals left me feeling as though I were caught in an endless storm. On those days, I sought refuge in the simplicity of small pleasures. I would prepare a modest meal from foraged berries, wild greens, and freshly caught fish, savoring the flavors as if they were rare treasures granted by the gods. Occasionally, as I sat near the warm glow of a hearth, I would allow myself to become lost in the meditative act of mending my leather boots, an activity that, though seemingly trivial, provided a comforting rhythm in the face of life's larger uncertainties. The repetitive passage of needle through leather, combined with the gentle murmur of the evening wind, offered a quiet counterpoint to the more demanding and dramatic moments of my quest. In these acts of daily routine, I discovered that there was as much wisdom to be found in the humble work of repairing shoes as there was in the recitation of ancient incantations. In time, this approach taught me to approach each day with a sense of quiet purpose, knowing that even the simplest acts could carry the weight of profound meaning. My journey as both shaman and warrior continued through many seasons, and over the years, I met countless souls whose lives, too, were marked by the ceaseless interplay of fate and chance. Among these was a fellow warrior named Einar, a man whose robust laughter and fearless heart made him a natural leader in our raiding parties. Einar and I developed a friendship that was as unexpected as it was enduring. He, with his bold exploits and enthusiastic retelling of every skirmish we encountered, served as a lively foil to my more reflective nature. On our long voyages across turbulent seas, he would regale me with tales of his childhood misadventures, stories involving an overly ambitious attempt to ride a wild boar and a subsequent run-in with an irate herd of cattle, which induced in me a steady, affectionate smile. His vibrant energy, while sometimes at odds with my meditative quietude, enriched every journey, reminding me that every life, no matter how fraught with peril or steeped in mysticism, was enriched by moments of pure, unbridled laughter. There was also a time during a particularly arduous winter raid when the hardships of our chosen path seemed especially severe. The cold was merciless, and the landscape itself appeared as bleak and unyielding as the stern countenances of our enemies. We had ventured far into enemy territory, and the biting wind seemed to seep into our very bones. One evening, after a long day fraught with exhaustion and the lingering fear of ambush, I found myself huddled with my comrades around a small flickering fire. As the flames danced and crackled, I began to recount a rather comical incident that had occurred on a previous expedition, a tale in which a supposedly fearsome enemy shield blew off mid-battle and revealed a rather damp and disheveled tunic underneath. My retelling of the tale, delivered in my slow, measured tone, drew reluctant smiles from even the most hardened warriors. In that moment of shared levity, as we stared into the dying embers of our meager fire, I was reminded that laughter was not merely a respite from hardship. It was a way to reclaim our humanity, to remind ourselves that even in the direst of circumstances, there was always space for simple, honest humor. As the years passed and I grew older, my days turned into a tapestry of interwoven memories, each a gentle reminder of the myriad ways in which humor and solemnity dance together in the intricate rhythm of life. I looked back on my youth with a kind of fond nostalgia, remembering how every raiding expedition and every ritual, no matter how fraught with danger, was also imbued with moments of unexpected tenderness. I often found solace in the quiet repetition of familiar activities. Mornings were spent near my little garden, where I grew a modest array of herbs and wildflowers, a living reminder of the natural order and its capacity for both healing and humor. I tended to my garden with a quiet diligence, the simple act of weeding and watering serving as a counterpoint to the more dramatic elements of my past. It was here, amidst the soft rustling of leaves and the gentle hum of insects, that I would sometimes pause to reflect on the enduring wisdom of nature. that even in a world of constant change and occasional discord, there was always a steady, timeless current running beneath the surface. In the quieter evenings of my later years, as the fleet light of a waning summer bathed the land in a soft golden glow, I would often share my tales with those who still sought the mysteries of ancient lore and the unpredictable magic of fate. Younger men and women, curious about the ways of the old world, would gather in the longhouse around the hearth. I spoke slowly of battles won by wit rather than brute strength, of rituals carried out with a gentle twang of humor that belied the seriousness of their purpose, and of moments when even the gods seemed to wink at our human follies. I recounted how a wayward gust of wind could upend the formalities of a ritual in the most charming manner, a moment when ancient rites turned into spontaneous celebrations of imperfection. In these quiet sessions, my voice would carry the soft, worn cadence of one who had seen many winters and summers, each one a lesson in the delicate balance between destiny and daily life. The faces of my listeners, lit by the glow of the flames and softened by the reverence of shared memories, were a comforting sight that affirmed that every story weaved the same continuous thread, flowing gently from one generation to the next. Of course, in the midst of tales, there were sometimes unexpected diversions, like the time I recounted the story of a misplaced satchel that had caused quite the stir among a group of unsuspecting traders. I had once entrusted a bag filled with medicinal herbs to a trader on his way to a distant market, a simple act intended to promote goodwill and health among the people he traded with. However, fate, in its amusing wisdom, had other plans. The satchel, it turned out, had found itself in the hands of a merchant notorious for his love of extravagant attire and flamboyant gestures. The merchant, upon discovering the mysterious herbs, decided that they were the perfect adornment for his next grand parade, stringing them along his belt and even crafting a makeshift hat from the fragrant bundles. When word of this reached me, I could not help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. The genuine humor of the situation, the idea that nature's gifts could be repurposed for such a ludicrous, yet oddly beautiful, display, reminded me that life was full of unexpected delights, each one a gentle nudge from destiny to not sweat the small stuff. As I sit now in the twilight of my life, reflecting on decades of journeys that spanned both the mortal and the divine, I recognize that my existence has been an ongoing dialogue between the serious and the silly. The countless days spent bridging the realms of gods and men have left me with a quiet understanding that humor and solemnity need not be enemies, but rather complementary notes in the symphony of life. I still recall moments when, in the midst of a fierce battle or a weighty ceremony, a stray smile or a whispered joke would surface, a reminder that even the gods, in their infinite wisdom, allowed for moments of levity. Amid the grandeur of destiny, I often remark that it seems the divine itself had a fondness for irony, lending a wry smile to both the somber rituals and the impromptu animal antics that punctuated my days. I have come to understand that each life is composed of a series of simple, unremarkable moments that, when strung together, reveal the extraordinary beauty of existence. Whether it was the delicate balance of nature observed in the quiet murmur of a forest brook, or the chaotic joy of a raiding party celebrating a hard-won victory, every experience contributed to the intricate mosaic of my journey. There were days when I'd walk along the narrow, winding paths of the countryside, my thoughts adrift like the drifting sea mists, contemplating the delicate interplay between fate and free will. Even the misadventures, such as the infamous incident involving a misfired charm that temporarily imbued my beard with the scent of wild garlic, became cherished stories, retold with a gentle laugh as testament to the unpredictable nature of life. I would sometimes muse that perhaps it was not a misfire at all, but rather an unintentional blessing from the gods, reminding me that appearances could be misleading, and that even a smelly beard could carry the fragrance of a well-timed jest. I have spent long hours cradled in memory, revisiting quiet moments when, amidst the bustle of raiding parties and the weight of spiritual responsibilities, a fleeting experience, be it the sight of a rainbow arching over a stormy sky, or the unexpected cheer of a village child who believed that my staff was a magical scepter, reminded me of the tender undercurrent that ran beneath life's dramatic surface. In those moments, I felt a profound kinship with everything around me, a knowing that all things, from the grandest of battles to the smallest act of daily routine, shared a common thread of quiet wonder. I have learned, over many long years, that life is not solely a narrative of gallant exploits or soaring triumphs, but also a composition of subtle interludes where laughter and reflection mingle freely. Even now, as I sit by my modest home with the soft glow of the evening sun filtering through the window, I find that the old embers of my adventures continue to spark in unexpected ways. I can still recall the gentle mirth that filled our longhouse during those feasts when a misbehaving livestock or a series of accidental mishaps turned solemn ceremonies into impromptu gatherings of joy. I remember the wise, albeit quirky teachings of my mentor, Torsten, who once counseled me that if I ever felt my duties overwhelming, I should simply take a moment to mend a pair of boots or recite a silly rhyme to the wind. Such advice, though delivered in a cadence that bordered on the absurd, taught me that the simplest acts carried with them their own seeds of redemption and delight. In my quieter times, I like to revisit the memories of the past as one might pore over a well-loved tapestry, each thread a story in its own right. One may find it peculiar that a life spent traversing the boundaries between the sacred and the profane should be punctuated by such unassuming details. The slight creak of a wooden door in a longhouse, the soft drizzle of rain outside a window as one reads an old, weathered scroll, or even the clumsy stumble of a once proud shield maiden who lost her balance while recounting a tale of valor. Yet I have come to understand that in each of these moments lay a quiet testament to the enduring spirit of humanity, a spirit that, no matter how relentlessly the winds of change may blow, finds solace in the simplicity of laughter and the unwavering rhythm of the everyday. I have often pondered the notion that humor might be the true magic of this world, a force capable of bridging the vastest divides between gods and mortals, between the trappings of fate and the blossoming of impromptu joy. In my many years traversing the terrains of both bloodshed and ritual, I have witnessed the transformative power of a well-timed laugh or a shared smile. It is, in the small, almost imperceptible details, the way a flock of birds suddenly took flight when approached by an overly enthusiastic ox, or how a priest's solemn blessing was momentarily interrupted by an errant chicken strutting along the aisle, that I found reminders of life's inherent capacity for irony and delight. I have learned that humor, in its purest form, is not a distraction from the gravitas of our struggles, but rather a gentle acknowledgement of the unpredictable tapestry that we all share. As twilight deepened into the kind of quiet night when the stars themselves seemed to pause in reverent silence, I would sometimes slip away into the solitude of the forest, walking beneath a canopy of ancient trees that held the memory of countless seasons. I would let my thoughts wander as freely as the delicate wisps of fog that wreathed the forest floor. In these moments of quiet solitude, it was as if the spirit of the land itself, ever playful and patient, whispered secrets about the nature of joy to those who took the time to listen. I have often reflected that perhaps the greatest legacy of a Viking shaman is not found in the ferocity of his raids or the solemn weight of his rituals, but in the simple, steadfast ability to find humor and warmth in even the harshest of winters. The memories of my younger days, filled with both laughter and the occasional tear, now lie like gentle echoes in my mind, each one a soft reminder that the journey through life is best experienced with a light heart. I recall with fondness the many evenings when tall tales were shared beneath the glow of a shared fire, a time when the lines between myth and reality blurred, and the cosmic dance of destiny was recounted with a gentle twinkle in every eye. The rhythmic hum of voices, the clinking of wooden cups, and the soft shuffle of worn boots on earthen floors created a symphony of familiarity. Though the moments themselves might have seemed mundane to an outsider, to me they were as precious and rare as the first blush of sunrise after a long, dark night. Now, as the pages of my life turn slowly toward an inevitable dusk, I sit with quiet satisfaction, knowing that every step, every mistaken incantation, every unexpected bout of laughter during a serious rite, and every humble moment spent in the simple act of living has contributed to a life as full and unpredictable as the sea in winter. I have come to realize that the path of a Viking shaman is not paved solely with the weight of prophecies or the grandeur of myth, but with the unassuming threads of everyday experience. The song of the wind, the sparkle of an unexpected smile, the gentle crinkle of laughter shared between friends. It is that medley of moments that together forms the tapestry of a life rich with meaning, no matter how seemingly ordinary. I suppose what I have learned, after so many years of wandering both battlefields and quiet groves, is that humor is the most enduring magic of all. It is the fragile, pervasive force that binds the living to the divine. That reminds us to cherish each day's quiet wonders even amid the clamor of swords and the urgency of ancient rites. It has been my constant companion, a subtle ally that graced even the bleakest winter nights with its soft radiance, a constant reminder that no matter how bitter the cold or heavy the burden, there is always space for a gentle smile and a quiet laugh. And so I continue to honor that legacy, passing it on to younger souls like a cherished heirloom. A softly whispered secret of resilience and grace. I have told you, dear listener, my story, a tale of raids and rituals, of fierce battles and quiet moments, of humorous mishaps and the enduring warmth of simple joys. In recounting these memories, I hope you find a gentle invitation to reflect on your own journey and to recognize that in the midst of grand adventures or even life's smallest moments, there is a deep magic waiting to be discovered. The days of my youth, though marked by the clangor of battle cries and the solemn cadence of sacred rites, were equally defined by moments so small and tender that they might have otherwise vanished into the tapestry of time. Yet each one remains a cherished gem, a soft reminder that life, no matter how tumultuous, carries within it the capacity for both wonder and laughter. Now, as I watch the last sliver of daylight give way to the gentle embrace of twilight, I am filled with the comfort of knowing that all things, both grand and minute, are threads in the vast loom of existence. Each memory, whether tinged with the bittersweet sting of regret or sparkling with the effervescence of delight, is a testament to a life lived in delicate balance, a life that celebrated both the solemn and the absurd with equal passion. And though my steps have grown slower and my words softer with the passing of the years, the essence of who I once was, the Viking, the shaman, the wanderer, and the joyful mischief maker, remains as vibrant beneath my skin as the first pulse of life on a bright, dewy morning. So, dear listener, as you ease into the quiet hours of the night, let your thoughts wander like the gentle drift of clouds over rolling hills. Imagine, if you will, a life where the sacred and the silly coexist in harmonious balance, where every raid, every ritual, and every gentle misadventure is but a note in the long, slow melody of existence. There is a peculiar kind of magic in the everyday, a magic that softly reminds us that no matter the challenges we face, there is always time to share a laugh, to appreciate the delicate absurdities of fate, and to treasure the simple, enduring beauty of each new dawn. In the soft glow of memory, and amidst the quiet echoes of ancient chants,